So I'm really looking forward to being part of a concert to raise money for Ukraine, which is happening at the end of the month. It's been organised by Paul and Fiona, and they join me now. Tell me about the concert then. Let's start with Fiona, because I expect Fiona's got all this under control here. The concert, what's it all about and why are you doing it?
Do you know what? We had a dream. This was, months and months and months ago. And we could see ourselves, you know how the Holy Spirit shows you things to come. Well, we had this dream to gather some wonderful, wonderful worshippers to worship the Lord for a good cause. And it just seemed so clear to us that it should be for Ukraine. And this dream was in our hearts, and we'd been praying over it and lifting it to the Lord and talking about it. And then Paul was doing his annual charity concert at G Live in Guildford. Wonderful people were there. Noel Robinson was there, and a lovely man called Les Moyer, you know very well. And Paul shared that with Les, and Les said, I'll help you. And boy, has he been helping us. Yeah. And it just grew from that. It's a night of hope and worship to support Ukraine on the 30th of this month. And it's just going to be the most amazing time. We have been overwhelmed, haven't we, darling, of all the people who said straight away, yes, people like you. They've just said, yes, we'll do it. Because I think everybody's heart is just so for those people who are suffering out there in Ukraine. And, you know, it's sort of disappeared a bit in the news. It's coming back all the time, of course, but it's a terrible situation, and we just want to do something to help. And also everybody who comes is just going to be exceedingly blessed by the amazing worship that's going to happen.
Now then, Paul, tell us who's on the bill, because the both of you will be there hosting, I expect. Are you both going to perform?
We are indeed going to sing a couple of songs, but really mostly it's the guests that we're sort of focusing on. Yeah. And it's an amazing list. Apart from you, there's Basil Mead, Lou Fellingham, Dave Bilborough, Maiwa, Sounds of New Wine, Philippa Hanna, of course, and Bryn Howarth, and Noel Robinson again.
he can't escape. You've got his number now. That's the thing, isn't it? You've got his number, so he can't escape. You talk about the dream. Now then, for people who don't understand what you're talking about, did you really have did you go to bed, wake up in the morning, I had this dream last night, Paul? Or, how does it happen? How does it happen?
You see, I've been doing these secular charity gigs for years. Noel Robinson did the most recent secular one that we did. It's actually Fiona who said, why don't we just do complete Christian one? That was actually January. That was before Russia invaded Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, bam, Ukraine was hot in the news. So we said, that's what we'll do. And because we've supported Samaritan's Purse for years, it seemed to us obvious that would be the route that we would use, because Samaritan's Purse immediately, as soon as that happened, went straight into action, as they always do whenever there's a crisis anywhere in the world, and set up local hospitals, temporary hospitals with operating theatres, so they can actually perform, healing for people. And so we just thought, well, this is obvious. This is forming itself into what it's going to be, and it has.
Yeah. So it's going to be at the Kensington Temple on Sunday, the 30th of October. It's quite an early kick-off, isn't it? So you can still get your train home afterwards if you want to come into London from far away. It's from 6 until 8 p.m. And I've read the poster. It says, come prepared to give. Not just with your singing, but with your money, yeah?
Well, it's free to get in. It's absolutely free, because we want everybody there, everybody to be able to come. But obviously, with a heart for supporting this wonderful charity and trying to just do something to bring some help and to bring some comfort to these people in a lot of need. And you're going to be there.
I'm looking
Thank
forward
you
to it.
so much for so quickly saying yes to that. That's so kind of you.
Now then, let's talk about the two of you. You've survived. You've done, well done, good and faithful servants, as the book says. Because, really, the industry that you came from doesn't really promote this sort of long life of one marriage, does it? You've done remarkably well. How you put up with him, Fiona, first of all? Is it hard work?
Absolutely wonderful.
Recently, I was doing something with a musician who was part of the orchestra for Guys and Dolls, which was at the National Theatre, which is where we met. And he said to me, "Are you still with Fiona?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "Goodness gracious." And he couldn't believe it because, show business is full of broken marriages, right?
Yeah.
In fact, it's funny that you should mention this because when we literally just got married, and in those days, way back, we went to All Souls Church in London. Mm-hmm. And this sweet chap came up to us and he said, "Have you heard of the triangle?" We said, "The triangle? No, we've not heard of the triangle." "Well, we've heard of a triangle." He said, "Oh, no, let me tell you this." He said, "So there's Paul and there's you, and at the top, there's God. And the closer that you two get to God, the closer you get to each other."
Brilliant.
It's a lovely, simple visual there.
It is.
But it just has blessed us.
It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, because the story is Guys and Dolls. You were the Salvation Army, Fiona. You were a gangster, Paul. Do you know the funny thing is when I was growing up, one of the biggest evangelists in my part of the world was a guy called Stan Ford. Stan Ford's a big man. He was a fairground boxer, and he'd been in a pub, and this little lady'd come around selling the war cry, and he picked her up and put her on the table, and sing, and she sang, and he got saved, and they got married. So, it's life imitating art. Stan Ford, the boxer, he had the biggest hands of any man. I must have been smaller, I suppose, as well. So life imitating art, art imitating life. You obviously you grew up with dreams. You, Fiona, I mean, I've done a little bit of research. I know there's good blood in you, Welsh blood in you. Where does the Welsh blood go back to?
Oh, well, that's my mother. You see, Llangollen.
Llangollen?
Yes, that's my dear, precious mother. She's in heaven now, but... Yes, absolutely. My family all grew up. My mother grew up in an inn. They ran an inn. But my grandfather was a lay preacher, and my grandmother apparently was this amazing. Mum would tell me wonderful things about my grandmother, how she loved the Lord, and they loved singing, those wonderful hymns, and so my mother, she had that in her, and we'd talk about God, and I'm sure that helped, eventually on my path to come to know the Lord Jesus. So yes, Welsh. And
I'm going to come to you in a minute, Paul. You're not going to escape this, but I'm just a couple of things. Now, Louis Palau was the preacher when you both walked out and said, "I want to give my life to Jesus." But of course, he was saved in Argentina, and that came out of the Welsh revival. They were all. It was Welsh missionaries came out of the Welsh revival in 1904. Went down to Argentina. The gospel spread down there. So that way, Paul. Now you've got to compete with that. How Welsh can I make you with a name like Jones? There's bound to be something there. Not at all.
I'm sorry. Not even announced. Mind you, I haven't contacted Ancestry to check, but I might turn out to. I think probably. Most of me comes from England, and the east of England at that.
Yeah. Now then, in many people's minds, you are almost the archetypal English gentleman, with the way that you speak, but then the way that you play the harmonica. Now,
gentleman is right.
Yeah, yes. Gentleman. But that whole thing about the blues. Now, I have a very similar love for black gospel music. It happened when I saw a guy called Andre Crouch play at the Avonlea in
Andre.
1975, and it sort of changed my life because I was brought up in a little gospel hall in Wales, and the music was very important. Lots of a cappella singing on a Sunday morning. But I saw Andre Crouch, and it made me fall in love with black gospel music, and I've spent quite a lot of time down in the deep south. Now then, what about where did you fall in love with the blues?
Well, Actually, it's interesting you should say about Andre Crouch, because I was well into gospel music long before I heard Andre Crouch. I mean, I guess I probably started with Mahalia Jackson in the 50s. Although she was obviously singing and recording in the 40s, but that to me was something very special. And even alongside the blues, I was always aware of those wonderful groups like the Soul Stirrers and the Swan Silvertones and all those. And some people who are crazy about gospel music say, "Oh, those are late as well. You know, you've got to go further back." But I started to hear jazz when I was sort of in my early teens, and loved it. Absolutely loved it. Bought Louis Armstrong records and Sidney Bechet and Jelly Roll Morton and all those people. And it was from that I started to listen more to blues. It became the backbone of everything I did. Mm. People look at my career and they see the sort of pop hits from the early to mid 60s, and they say, "Well, you started with pop music, so when did you get into blues?" I was into blues long before I had anything to do with pop music, because when I joined the Manfreds, it was 6 jazz musicians in search of a living, and they decided to start a rhythm and blues band. Mm. And so that was the band that I joined. And if one goes back to the first Manfred Mann album, it's full of blues. It's all blues and rhythm and blues. Yeah. And so that was where I started, and that was where I'm still, actually, even to this day, with the Manfreds, doing that kind of music. In fact, we sort of reverted to the band we used to be when I first joined it. Yeah. But alongside blues has always been gospel, specifically black gospel. And one of my favorite records ever was Mahalia Jackson singing "Come Sunday" with Duke Ellington's orchestra. Absolutely breathtaking. Yeah. And I still go weak when I hear it.
So Mahalia Jackson, I'm going to be singing at the concert, and the song I'm going to be singing is "Dream Out Loud." That's why I always ask about dreams. You know, is it something that you really dream? Because people, you know, we use words that can be used in different circumstances. But my new record's called "Dream Out Loud." But the story behind the song, I went to Memphis a couple of times, and I got to know a guy called the Reverend Samuel Billy Kyles, and he had spent the afternoon in the Lorraine Motel on that last day with Martin Luther King. Oh. In fact, he'd actually invited him to Memphis for the garbage workers' strike. He said he was on the phone waiting, calling his wife to say, "We're all ready, we're going to come back for tea," because they're going to go for soul food. When the shot rang out, he saw his friend fall and covered his body in a blanket. And so that was like touching history. But then he told me this other story about the big speech at the Lincoln Memorial, the "I Have a Dream" speech. He said, if you listen to that speech at the beginning, it's boring. He's talking about economics. There's 250,000 people, and Martin Luther King is boring the audience. They're starting to shuffle a bit. A couple of weeks earlier, he'd been preaching, I think it was Philadelphia, with Mahalia Jackson singing on the bill. And on that night, he had preached. He just started preaching about how he hoped that one day his children would be judged by the content of their character, not the colour of their skin. So, Lincoln Memorial, 250,000 people. Martin Luther King is there boring the audience, and behind him, Mahalia Jackson says, "Martin, tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream." And that's when he goes off the notes and starts preaching. So there we are. You know, because it's all very well having a dream. You've got a dream to do this in the church in Kensington Temple at the end. But you've got to live out your dream. You've got to live your dream out loud. And so there we are. Maybe that's how our worlds colliding, if not just for today, but hopefully for the future as well. Your hopes for the night and your hopes for... Well, what about the hopes for yourself? You know, because you've had this amazing... Both of you had amazing careers. Is this enough? Is this enough for you? Do you know? Because I know the talent that you both have, and you've given so much to the church. Is it enough?
Do you know what? We just always know there's more. Mm-hmm. Because God has a plan, as you know. He has a plan for every single person, and that doesn't just stop. You know, very often we are led by the beautiful desires he puts in our hearts. But you said a great thing earlier on. You said you have to follow those dreams. You have to get up and do something about that. And that's why it's so important, for instance, with this beautiful a night that we're going to have in a couple of weeks' time at Kensington Temple, is that we began to pray towards it. We began to dream. We began to think, well, who would we ask? And it started growing and growing. And we've got plans for other things.
Yes.
Which we always believe that the best is still yet to come.
Yes.
And I think it's a wonderful way to live. Father, what else do you want us to do? Here I am. You know what you've given me. You know what gifts you've placed on the inside of me. However small one thinks they might be, please use them. Show us those doors to walk through. And right up to the time that we breathe our last, I believe that we are meant to be doing everything that he's put within our hearts and just go for it, as long as he's with us, all the way.
Fantastic. And Paul, how's the harmonica? Still good?
Oh yes. Harmonica. Yes, in fact, I got an award just very recently for being the president of Harmonica UK,
really?
Which is the alliance of everybody who plays harmonica in Britain. One of the things I've been doing for the last 43 years is a group called the Blues Band. And this kind of ties in with the question that FJ has just answered, which is the blues band's come to an end. It seemed to me that it was time for it to come to an end. And so that is what's happened. And we now, we've started to say all the time that we devoted to the blues band, that is now going to be devoted to the gospel.
Wow.
So that's pretty good. That's 43 years. So the next 43 years.
Well, you've done your apprenticeship, Paul. You've done your apprenticeship. I was telling Fiona, Moses spent 60 years in the wilderness looking after sheep, so he could lead 1 million people through to the promised land. So
absolutely. And I noticed, speaking of the harmonica, which I do love.
Yeah.
I was looking at the list of people that we've got, and I have played harmonica with 3 of the artists who will be giving all at the Kensington Temple on the 30th of this month. Yes, I can name 3 of them that I've actually played harmonica with and for.
Wow.
So that's quite good.
Yeah, we'll make it 4 or 5, but I'll get you on one of mine. One last little story. I remember going down to Clarksdale in the Delta. Now then, Fiona, if he hasn't bored you about Clarksdale in the Delta, let me bore you instead. Down in Clarksdale, it's where Robert Johnson apparently sold his soul to the devil, so he could learn to play guitar, not harmonica, learn to play guitar. Anyway, went down to Clarksdale. It's the home of the blues. And I went to church there with a guy called the Reverend Willie Morganfield. Does it ring any bells, Paul, the name Willie Morganfield? The Reverend Willie Morganfield.
Willie Morganfield, yes.
First cousin to Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters is first cousin.
Muddy Waters was McKinley Morganfield.
That's right, yes.
And Mud Morganfield, who is one of Muddy Waters' sons, is still singing the blues.
Yes.
But Willie is another matter entirely.
Yeah, well, Willie was a preacher. And so I went to church, and then I asked him afterwards about the singing. And I said, is that where the Spirit comes in? He said, well, for me, he says, because he's hooping, where you preach and you sing at the same time. He said, the preaching, that's the meat, but the music's the gravy. So there'll be plenty of gravy, and I expect there'll be some meat as well at the Kensington Temple on the 30th of November. It's going to be a joy to be there. Do I call you FJ from now on, or do I call you Fiona? I mean, I wasn't sure. Are we on first initial terms or not?
Please do call me FJ. In fact, it just feels so lovely. Everybody in my family calls me FJ.
You can call me MP. Actually, maybe I should be an MP, but that's a different story. Or maybe PM, one or the other. Anyway, I mean, thank you very much for your time. Really looking forward to. Thanks for the invitation to be a part of this wonderful event. So it's at the Kensington Temple. It's on the 30th of October. Kickoff is 6 o'clock. It's free entry, but come with your pockets full of cash. From me, Fiona,
and we look forward
FJ.
To seeing you there in the flesh, Mal.
Yeah, yes, very much.
God bless you both.
God bless you. God bless you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.